The Unmarked. Chapter 1. The Awakening. The first thing I noticed wasn't the city's silence. It was the absence of my name. I stood in the middle of a rain-slick alley, cold water dripping from my hair, my breaths shallow and uncertain. The world around me pulsed with quiet order, figures moved with purpose, their faces downcast, their arms glowing with a soft golden mark that shimmered beneath their skin. Each mark was unique, etched into their flesh like fate itself. Some bore the curved lines of a healer, others the sharp sigils of an enforcer, a life's purpose carved into bone and blood before birth. Everyone had one. Except for me. Sound cue, a distant chime, an electronic hum. A flickering billboard glowed above the street, scanning the passing crowd. As people walked beneath its beam, their marks illuminated like fireflies, their identities flashing across the screen, the system acknowledged them. I stepped forward. Nothing happened. The scanner didn't react. No recognition beep or name appeared in digital letters. It was as if I didn't exist. I swallowed hard. A woman brushed past me, her mark glowing softly beneath her sleeve. For a brief second she hesitated, her brow furrowed, lips parting as if she just realized something was missing. Then, she shook her head and walked on. I exhaled sharply. People didn't just ignore me. They forgot me. You were never supposed to be here. I turned sharply. The alley behind me was empty. The voice had been beside me, breath hot against my ear, but no one was there. A chill crept down my spine. I didn't know my name. I didn't understand why I was here. But something knew me, and it was hunting. A sharp and clinical mechanical chime echoed through the city. Public fate scanner had been activated nearby. Citizens shuffled toward it in obedient silence, lifting their arms to display their marks. The scanner glowed blue as it read them, confirming their place in the world. I stepped backward, pulse racing. I had no mark. No record. I wasn't in the system. I wasn't supposed to be here. I turned to run. Too late. I had already been seen. Sound cue. The city pauses. A long, deafening silence. And this time the world noticed me back. Chapter 2. The Anomaly. The world wasn't moving. The streets were frozen in place. People caught mid-step, their expressions vacant, their marks pulsing faintly beneath their skin. The public fate scanner glitched above them, its holographic text breaking into distorted symbols. I took a step back. The air was thick and heavy, as if time itself had stuttered. Then, the system rebooted. The moment passed. The world lurched back into motion. But not before the intercom crackled to life. A cold mechanical voice slithering through the city. System anomaly detected. I ran. Sound cue, footsteps pounding, distant sirens wailing to life. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move and disappear before the enforcers locked onto me. The city felt wrong around me. Street lights flickered in jagged rhythms. Billboards distorted, their smiling faces warped into something unreadable. I turned a corner and collided with someone. A man, tall and wiry, his coat hanging loosely around his frame. His mark shimmered faintly on his wrist, but his eyes, sharp and knowing, locked on mine. You're not very good at staying hidden, are you? His voice was smooth, laced with something between amusement and caution. I staggered back, my heart pounding. Whoa. Sound cue, a harsh mechanical whir, the low, electric hum of drones activating. He grabbed my wrist and yanked me into the shadows. You really shouldn't be out in the open right now. The alley was damp, and the scent of rust and rain filled the air. Ezra Calder leaned against the wall as he introduced himself and studied me. You don't have a mark, he said. It wasn't a question. I swallowed. And you remember me? That made him pause. His brow furrowed slightly as if something in his mind wasn't aligning. I don't forget faces. But you, he exhaled, shaking his head. I feel like I should know you. I don't remember why. A chill crept through me. You've seen someone like me before. Ezra hesitated. Then, not in a long time. He pushed off the wall and motioned for me to follow. Come on. We both froze. The air shifted. The streetlights dimmed, their glow bleeding into the darkness. Then, sound cue, a deep, rhythmic hum. A voice, layered and unnatural whispering. You were never meant to be. I turned slowly. Something was there. Not an enforcer, not human. The shadows at the alley's edge stretched, flickering like a broken signal. And then, they moved. Sound cue. A slow, distorted pulse. Static crackling in the distance. Their faces were blank, shifting like static. They didn't walk. They glided, their bodies facing in and out of existence. Ezra stiffened beside me. Run. We tore through the back streets, weaving through the neon-lit underbelly of the city. I could feel them behind us, the Watchers. I didn't know what they were, but every instinct screamed that they weren't supposed to exist. Or maybe, I wasn't. The city seemed to react as we ran, billboards flickering, glass distorting, space folding in on itself. For a brief second, as we passed a shattered storefront window, I saw something. Sound cue. A single, sharp chime, like a memory resurfacing. My reflection. But not me. The woman staring back had a mark. Deep, jagged, glowing with something unreadable. A name whispered through my mind. Find the archive. Then, the image fractured. Sound cue. Reality snapping back. The Watchers whispering. Closer now. Ezra dragged me forward, nearly yanking me off my feet. We need to move. Nowhere is safe. Sound cue. A door slamming. A moment of silence. Our breathing, ragged. We crashed into a dimly lit hideout, Ezra's safe house. There were exposed pipes and a flickering terminal, and the air was thick with burnt circuits and secrecy. I leaned against the wall, my pulse hammering. I had seen something. No, I had remembered something. I need to find the archive. Ezra turned sharply. His face was unreadable, but his hands clenched into fists. That place doesn't exist. But in the distance beyond the closed door. Sound cue. A slow rhythmic pulse. The whispers, closer than before. Something new I remembered. And it was coming. You were never supposed to wake up. Chapter 3. The archive. Ezra's safe house smelled of burnt circuits and old data chips. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering terminal screen, its blue glow reflecting off the tangle of stolen tech scattered across the floor. I sat on the edge of a metal table, my breath slow, steady. The words I had spoken still hung between us. I need to find the archive. Ezra stood by the terminal, fingers drumming against the surface. He didn't look at me. Instead, he exhaled sharply and said, "That place doesn't exist." But we both knew that was a lie. I shook my head. I remembered it. "You'll get it," he muttered, finally turning to face me. His dark eyes were sharp and calculating. "People have searched for the archive before. No one ever finds it." I stared back at him. Or maybe they did, and someone ensured we never knew. Ezra's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked uncertain. I pushed forward. "You told me you've heard of the Unmarked before. What became of them?" He hesitated. Then, they were erased. The words settled like lead in my stomach. I swallowed. Then why am I still here? A stolen identity. The Nexus Hub was a fortress, a towering structure at the city's core, where identities were logged, marks were assigned, and fates were controlled. If the archive existed, it had been erased from public records. The Nexus Hub kept everything. The only problem, I wasn't in the system. Ezra knelt beside a cluttered workbench, a black market marking device in his hands. The small injector gleamed under the dim light, filled with liquid code, an illegal forged identity waiting to be embedded into my skin. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. He pressed the injector to my forearm. A sharp, burning pain tore through me. I gritted my teeth as the device etched a mark into my skin, an illusion, a lie crafted from stolen data. When the pain faded, I glanced down. A mark shimmered beneath my skin, not real, not mine. But the moment I saw it, something inside me lurched. The world around me shifted as if adjusting to recognize me again. Then, a whisper. "You don't belong here." The room glitched. I gasped as the walls flickered, dark patches spreading like static over reality. Ezra cursed, grabbing my arm. "Move, now." We barely made it through the exit before the safe house collapsed inward. vanishing, erased as if it had never existed. The Watchers were closing in, and I was running out of time. The Nexus Hub. We reached the outskirts of the Nexus Hub, its metallic structure looming over us like a monument to control. Ezra's fingers hovered near the device on his wrist. Stay calm. If anyone asks, you're a data technician. Your mark will hold. I looked down at it. This false identity burned into my skin. It felt wrong. But I had no choice. We stepped forward. The scanner blinked. A soft chime rang out. Green light, access granted. The system accepted me. As I walked through the doors, the whisper returned, louder this time. You'll belong here. Chapter 4. The Nexus. The Nexus Hub was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against your skull. That felt engineered, like even sound was being controlled. The air smelled of sterilized metal and cold circuitry, and as I stepped inside, I swore the walls were breathing. I kept my posture straight, my expression neutral as Ezra walked beside me. His fingers tapped rhythmically against his wrist. An old habit, a silent code. We passed through layers of security. Rows of marked employees, their faces blank, their movements almost robotic. My fake mark burned under my skin. A lie the system had accepted. But my body knew better. You'll belong here. I froze. The whisper wasn't just in my mind. It was coming from the walls. The core terminal. Ezra nudged me forward. We moved deeper, slipping past humming data servers and surveillance nodes. At the heart of the Nexus Hub was the core terminal, where the government didn't just store data, it erased it. We reached the archive room. I stared at the rows of black files, each labeled with a single word. Erased. There were hundreds of them. Ezra worked fast, pulling up a holographic interface. We don't have much time. Look for anything connected to the archive. I scanned the files, my pulse quickening. Some were tagged with identification codes, old names, and deletion dates. But then, I saw it. A black file. No name, no code. Just a word. Sienna. The Watchers arrive. The lights flickered. Ezra stiffened. That's not me. The air grew thick, reality stuttering, like the world was trying to reject my presence. And then, they appeared. The Watchers didn't enter. They manifested. Figures flickered in and out of existence like living static. Their heads twitched at unnatural angles, and their faces shifted like distorted signals. And they were watching me. Ezra grabbed my arm. We have to go. Now. But I couldn't move. As my fingers closed around the sleek black file, anticipation surged, and the moment I touched it, I fell. A fragment of the past. The Nexus Hub melted away. I was somewhere else, somewhere that existed before. A cold, sterile lab, screens flickering. A row of marking devices. And I was there. I was standing in front of them. A mark was burned onto a stranger's arm, an enforcer mark, glowing red. I watched myself test the code, making adjustments. I was one of them. I had helped design the fate system. I had helped erase people. And then something went wrong. I saw my reflection in the glass. And I saw my mark. Not an enforcer, not a citizen. Something else entirely. Then, everything shattered. Back to reality. I gasped, lungs heaving as I slammed back into the present. Ezra was shouting my name. The Watchers were closing in. I tried to move, but the world was breaking. The Nexus Hub wasn't the same anymore, as if my presence had corrupted it, altered its existence. Security alarms blared. Lights exploded in bursts of static. Ezra pulled me, dragging me toward an exit as reality flickered and tore apart behind us. We barely made it out. I collapsed onto the road, my legs trembling, my head reeling. I understood now. I wasn't just a freak. I was part of the system itself. And the system was trying to eradicate me once again. Chapter 5. The Fracture. The Nexus Hub still shimmered behind us, its structure warping, attempting to maintain itself. Ezra and I navigated through the streets blacked out, ducking into alleyways, our breathing heavy. I swore I saw the air ripple every few seconds as if the world struggled to decide whether I belonged. I clutched my arm, feeling the fake mark still burned into my skin, It had worked. It had gotten me inside. But it wasn't mine. And now, I knew the truth. I was never just an anomaly. I was part of the system before. But what had I done to make them erase me? A truth Ezra doesn't want to hear. We slipped into the shadows of an abandoned subway station, its tunnels long forgotten beneath the city's surface. Ezra leaned against the cracked tile wall, exhaling sharply. That was too close. I was still staring at my hands, my mind replaying the vision from the Nexus hub. I saw myself, I murmured. Ezra frowned. What? I looked up. Back in the Nexus hub, I saw a memory. I helped create the marks. I was part of the system before I was erased. Ezra's expression darkened. You're saying you built this? His voice was quieter now. More dangerous. I shook my head. I don't know. I only saw fragments. But I was there. And I think... My throat tightened. I think I was the first Unmarked. A long silence stretched between us. Ezra's gaze flicked to my mark, still glowing faintly under my skin. And I trusted you. I flinched. Before I could respond, the air shivered. The space around us twisted, bending at unnatural angles. And then... a watcher appeared. The warning. This one didn't attack. It stood still, its shifting, static-like face unreadable. Then, it spoke. You were the first. The voice was wrong, layered with hundreds of echoes, as if it existed simultaneously across multiple moments. My blood ran cold. Ezra's hand twitched toward his weapon, but the watcher didn't move. You opened the door, it whispered. You must not remember. I took a step forward. What door? What did I do? But before it could answer, it convulsed. Its form began to break apart, pixels shattering, its shape collapsing inward as if it were being forcibly erased. I lunged forward. Wait. But it was gone. Only a symbol remained, burned into the concrete where it had stood. A key to the past? Ezra knelt, tracing the shape with his fingers. His expression was tense. I know this mark. I looked at him. What is it? He hesitated, then exhaled. An old marking station, one that was shut down years ago. Something inside me clicked into place. That was where I had to go. The city is changing. As we traveled through the city's underbelly, something felt off. The streets didn't match the maps anymore. Buildings were in the wrong places. The sky flickered, shifting between daylight and night in a single breath. Ezra glanced at me, his expression grim. What's happening? I swallowed. I exhaled. I think I'm breaking something. The hidden facility. We reached the old marking station buried beneath the city's core. The entrance was sealed, and the metal doors rusted shut. Ezra glanced at me. If this is the place, how do we? But before he could finish, I stepped forward. The moment my fingers brushed the door, it unlocked. Ezra tensed. Okay. That's not normal. I pushed the doors open. The inside was untouched, a facility frozen in time. Dust floated in the air, the glow of old marking devices still faintly pulsing. And at the very center of the room, there was one device still active. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. There was a name on the screen. My name. Chapter 6. The first mark. The marking station was frozen in time. Dust coated the surfaces, untouched by years. Old marking devices lined the walls, their once bright interfaces flickering dimly like ghosts of the past. But only one remained fully powered. And it had my name on it. Ezra stood beside me, his breath slow and controlled, but his eyes never left the screen. This is impossible, he muttered. I stepped closer, my fingers hovering above the device. The glow from the terminal cast strange shadows across my skin, making my fake mark seem even more unnatural. I swallowed hard. Then, I touched the screen. A message from the past. The marking device whirred to life, a deep, mechanical hum filling the room. The old monitors flickered, displaying corrupted code that scrolled too fast for me to process. Then, a voice. My voice. If you are hearing this, it means they failed to erase you. I froze. The voice was mine, but it wasn't me. It was a past version of myself. Ezra stiffened beside me. What the hell? The screen glitched violently and more words came through, fragmented, distorted. You were the first. You were never supposed to be marked. A chill ran down my spine. But we made a mistake. The world around me blurred. Then, the machine pulled me under. The truth of the marks. The marking station vanished. I was somewhere else. A lab, sterile and bright, lined with rows of marking chairs. I saw myself standing in front of them. I wasn't a lost nobody. I was one of the creators of the fate system. I watched my past self work, coding the marks and testing their integration. The system wasn't just assigning roles. It was rewriting reality itself. And then, I saw something I wasn't supposed to. The first unmarked. The scene shifted. I was in a marking chair now. A past version of me, strapped in as a technician, prepared the device. Something was wrong. The system hesitated. The machine glitched. The moment the mark should have been burned into my skin. It rejected me. The interface flashed warnings, the code breaking apart. The system couldn't assign me a fate. Instead, it did something worse. It unmarked me completely. The world around me began to dissolve. The last thing I heard before the vision shattered. A whisper. She is the fracture. Back to reality. I gasped, slamming back into the present. The marking station was shutting down, its once flickering lights going dark forever. Ezra was staring at me, his expression unreadable. What did you see? I exhaled shakily. The marks don't just track us. They define reality itself. Ezra's jaw clenched. And you? I swallowed. I was never supposed to exist outside the system. Then, the air began to distort. The Watchers arrive. The Watchers didn't appear the way they usually did. They materialized slowly, their forms twisting as if they were fighting something. For the first time, their voices were clear. You should not be here. Ezra reached for his weapon, but I shook my head. Wait. The Watchers weren't attacking. They were warning me. You must not remember. The words hit differently now. It wasn't just a mistake. I was a threat. The system had tried to erase me, but somehow, I had survived. And now, I was breaking it. The Watchers took a step forward. You are the fracture. And then, the marking station began to collapse. Nowhere left to hide. Reality fractured around us. The walls flickered, the floors cracking like shattered glass. Ezra grabbed my arm. We have to go. We ran. Behind us, the marking station imploded, erased from existence as if it had never been there. As we emerged onto the streets, I knew one thing for sure. The city wasn't going to let me exist for much longer. It was coming for me. And this time, it wouldn't fail. Chapter 7. The Hunt. The city was trying to erase me. The marking station was gone, collapsed into nothingness as if it had never existed. The ground still trembled beneath us, the last remnants of reality rewriting itself. Ezra and I ran, our breath ragged, our feet pounding against the rain-slick pavement. But we weren't alone. The Watchers were hunting us now. Not just watching, chasing. Reality is breaking, the city itself was glitching. Streetlights flickered in and out of existence. Buildings shifted, their shapes warping, twisting, entire blocks rearranging themselves like the world was actively trying to erase its mistake. Me. Ezra grabbed my arm, pulling me down a side alley. We can't keep running forever. I was barely listening, I could feel it. Something was changing. I had been a crack in the system before. Now, I was shattering it. Ezra's voice broke through my thoughts. What the hell are you? I turned to him, breathless. I don't know. A moment to breathe. We finally found shelter in an underground hideout buried deep beneath the city where the Marked had no power. The space was filled with old technology, stolen data servers, and flickering screens displaying code fragments from the Fate system. Ezra exhaled. We should be safe here. I wasn't so sure. A group of people stepped forward, outcasts, rebels, survivors. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a jagged mark on her wrist, froze when she saw me. You were the first. My stomach tightened. What did you say? She stepped closer, studying me. We've heard the rumors. The first unmarked. The one who survived the erasure. The truth about the Watchers. Lena, the woman who recognized me, led us deeper into the hideout. She tapped on an old terminal, and a series of faded digital profiles appeared. I gasped. The images were distorted, faces flickering like static. The Watchers. Lena's voice was grim. They aren't enforcers. Ezra frowned. Then what the hell are they? Lena exhaled. They're the ones the system erased. My blood ran cold. They were people like you, she continued. But they didn't survive the process, you did. Ezra's jaw tightened. So why are they after her? Lena hesitated. Then, because she's proof the system can fail. I swallowed hard. The Watchers weren't hunting me to destroy me. They were trying to erase the evidence of their existence. Nowhere left to hide. Before we could process what that meant, the air shivered. The screens glitched violently, text warping into unreadable symbols. Ezra cursed. They found us. Lena's expression darkened. They're coming. The walls shook, cracks spreading through the space. The hideout itself was being rewritten. And then, the Watchers arrived. They tore through the underground space like a virus, erasing everything they touched. Screams, panic. The outcasts tried to run, but the moment the Watchers reached them, they vanished. Not killed. Deleted. Lena shoved something into my hands. You need to go. Now. I looked down, a data chip. This is all that's left of the original code. Get to the central core before it's too late. Ezra grabbed my wrist. We have to move. But I couldn't stop staring at the Watchers. Their shifting, static faces. Their empty, reaching hands. They used to be people. And no, they were coming for me. The final lead. We just escaped just as the entire hideout collapsed behind us. I was shivering, the data chip clutched in a tight fist in my hand. Ezra pulled me on. What did she leave you? I gulped. A map. Ezra frowned. A map to what? I breathed out slowly. The central core. His face went white. That's not a real location. I looked up at him, and for the first time, felt this strange sense of conviction. Neither do I. Chapter 8. The Central Core. The city was disappearing. Not in a way that made sense or one you could escape. Buildings flickered in and out of existence. Streets twisted and looped back on themselves, leading us nowhere. The sky, if you could call it that, glitched, shifting between night and day in the space of a breath. Reality was rewriting itself. And I was the reason why. Ezra staggered beside me, his mark glitching, flickering in and out like it wasn't sure he was real. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight, grounding. We have to stop. I shook my head. We can't. His expression was grim. You'll get it, Sienna. The system is rejecting you. The closer we get, the worse it's going to get. I already knew that. But I couldn't stop now. I glanced at the data chip in my hand. The last fragment of the original code, the last proof that the fate system was a lie. And the only way to finish this was to get inside the central core. The lost sector. The map led us to a place that shouldn't have existed. A part of the city that wasn't on any digital records. A place that had been erased. But it was still here. And it was wrong. No people. No movement. No sound. The buildings stood perfectly intact, untouched by time. But there was something off about them. Their windows were too dark and too reflective. Ezra shivered. This place is dead. I wasn't so sure. At the center of the street was a doorway covered in corrupted symbols, shifting and warping as if they weren't meant to be seen. Ezra tried to scan it. His device short-circuited instantly. But when I stepped forward, the symbols recognized me, and the door opened. The descent. The moment we crossed the threshold, the world shifted violently. The buildings behind us erased themselves, the city deleting everything it could to stop us from going further. The Watchers appeared. This time they didn't just glide in from the shadows. They materialized from nothing. But they didn't attack. They pleaded. You must not enter. Their voices were more precise than before, no longer distorted echoes. Ezra grabbed my arm. Sienna. Maybe they're right. I turned to the Watchers. Why? What's inside? The Watchers flickered, their forms breaking apart like something forced them to be erased. But before they disappeared, one whispered, You will break everything. I looked at the path ahead. Then, without hesitation, I stepped through. And the world collapsed. Chapter 9. The Core. Falling into the unknown. The moment I stepped through the door, the world shattered. I didn't just fall. I plummeted. Ezra's voice echoed behind me, but I couldn't reach him. Reality fractured around me, time and space unraveling. Flashes of a life I didn't remember. A city before the marks. A group of scientists. A girl in a chair. Me. I hit the ground, except there was no ground. And then silence. A world outside the system. I woke to a void of shifting light. The central core wasn't a place, a room, or a server. It was something in between. Data streams pulsed around me, floating fragments of code, flickering between existence and deletion. Ezra lay a few feet away, his mark glitching so violently it looked like it was trying to leave his skin. I stood slowly. The air hummed, charged with something ancient and powerful. Then, a voice. Not a watcher, not the system. A voice I knew. You finally made it. I turned and stared at me. The truth revealed. She wasn't a reflection. She wasn't a memory. She was me, or at least, the version of me that had existed before all of this began. She watched me with something like regret. You're not supposed to remember. I took a slow breath. But I do. The core pulsed around us, data streams flowing faster, reacting to my presence. And suddenly, I remembered everything. I wasn't just part of the system. I was the first. The original test subject. The first person the fate system had ever tried to mark. And it failed. The system couldn't control me. Instead of giving me a role, it made me an anomaly. I wasn't supposed to exist. And the city has been trying to fix that mistake ever since. The system's final defense. The moment I understood the truth, the core reacted violently. A deep, shuddering pulse rippled through the void, and the world began unraveling. Ezra groaned as he stirred, his eyes widening as the watchers manifested inside the core. But they were different now. Not silent. Not empty. Desperate. Their voices layered over each other, pleading. You must not exist. You will break everything. You are the fracture. The core itself was fighting me now. Trying to erase me, again. The choice? Ezra stumbled to his feet, eyes starting between me and the collapsing world around us. Sienna, what did we do? I could feel it. I had control here. For the first time, the system wasn't just reacting to me, it was waiting. I could shut it down. But doing so wouldn't just erase the system. It would erase everything built upon it. The city, the people. All of it. Ezra grabbed my arm. Sienna, listen to me. Whatever choice you make, you can't take it back. I stared at the core, the pulsing data strands holding the world together. At the watchers, the people who had already been lost to the system's failures. And at myself. The version of me who had seen this moment coming. The world began to collapse. I made my choice. And as the void closed in, the last thing I heard. A whisper. You were never supposed to be here. Then, everything ended. Chapter 10. The Collapse. A world that shouldn't exist. I woke to silence. Not the kind of silence that meant peace. The kind that meant something was missing. The sky was glitching, flickering between endless black and static white. The buildings around me were half-formed, pieces of architecture floating in midair, disconnected from reality. The city was collapsing. And Ezra was gone. I pushed myself up, my body aching like it had been ripped apart and stitched back together. I didn't know where I was. I only knew one thing. I had broken the system. A world unraveling. I walked through the hollow city, my footsteps echoing too loudly. There was no one left. No marked. No enforcers. No watchers. Only fragments. I passed a floating street sign, its letters rearranging in an endless loop. A coffee shop with no door, no roof, just chairs and tables hovering in space. Then I saw them. The glitches. Faint silhouettes of people, half-formed, flickering in and out, their faces blurred. The remnants of those the system had erased. And now, I was one of them. The last warning. The air hummed, charged with something unnatural. Then, a voice. It wasn't Ezra. It wasn't a watcher. It wasn't me. It was the system itself. You were never meant to decide. I stopped breathing. You are the flaw in the design. A cold wave of fear settled over me. The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere. There is still time to erase you. The city around me trembled, buildings disassembling into raw data. The system was making its final move. Ezra's fate. Then I saw him. Ezra stood at the edge of what had once been a street, his back to me, staring into the void where the city ended. I ran to him. Ezra. He turned slowly, and my heart stopped. He was half erased. His mark glitched violently, his form flickering in and out like the system couldn't decide if he still existed. His eyes met mine, and he smiled. You broke it, Sienna. The system's final attempt. The voice returned, low and heavy, pressing against my mind. This world cannot continue. You must choose. The ground fractured beneath us, the last remnants of the city breaking apart. Then, a choice appeared before me. Not words, not text. Just knowledge. 2 paths. Reset everything. Erase myself. Let the fate system restart. Let the world go back to its controlled order. Or let the collapse finish. Erase everything. Let the world be free. But at what cost? Ezra's voice was barely a whisper. Sienna, whatever you do. The world lurched violently. I was out of time. The final decision. I looked at the 2 paths. I looked at Ezra. I looked at the broken city around me. Then, I made my choice. The moment I did, the system responded. A single word whispered through the collapsing world. Rewriting. And then, everything vanished. Chapter 11, Rewritten. A new reality. I woke up to the sound of a city breathing. No static. No glitches. No watchers whispering from the edges of existence. Just life. The air smelled of rain and concrete, the distant hum of traffic filling the space around me. I pushed myself up, my heartbeat steady but wrong. Like I had woken up in a dream I wasn't supposed to be in. The buildings were again whole, neon lights glowing softly in the early dawn. The streets were full of people walking with a sense of ease I didn't recognize. But something was missing. I looked at their arms. No marks. The fate system was gone. I exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to my head. What did I do? Was it ever real? The memories came in fragments. The Watchers. The Nexus Hub. The Central Core. Ezra. I turned to the people around me, my voice barely above a whisper. Excuse me. A woman glanced at me, her expression polite but distant. Yes. I hesitated. Do you remember the marks? She frowned. Marks. My pulse quickened. The fate system? The Watchers? Her confusion deepened. I have no idea what you're talking about. I stepped back, my breath shallow. I grabbed someone else, a man in a business suit. What year is it? He looked at me like I was in Chapter 12, The Last Echo. A world that doesn't know her. The city moved around me like I was a ghost. People laughed, worked, lived, completely unaware that their world had once been something else. It had been rebuilt around them. It had been erased. I walked through the neon-lit streets, my presence unnoticed, my steps unmarked by fate. I had won. But if I had, why did it feel like I had lost? The weight of the decision, I had freed the world. No more marks. No more fate system. People could live without being told who they were supposed to be. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the thought. Was that freedom? The world had been a lie before, but at least it had been something. Now, it was empty. Ezra was gone. The Watchers were gone. And I was the only one left who knew the truth. I stopped at an intersection, staring up at a digital billboard. It flickered softly, its advertisements harmless, meaningless. For a moment, I swore I saw a glitch. A flicker of something beneath the surface. Then it was gone. Everything follows a similar pattern. A ghost in the system. I retraced my steps, following something I didn't understand. It led me back to where this had all started. The place I had first woken up. The place where I first realized I wasn't supposed to exist. The alley was empty, just like before. The walls were cracked, damp, and forgotten by time. But when I stepped forward, a holographic terminal is activated. I froze. A command prompt blinked on the screen. Waiting. There was a message. One that had been left behind. The last echo. I hesitated. Then slowly, I reached out and pressed play. The screen glitched, and a voice filled the alley. If you're hearing this, then you made the choice. I inhaled sharply. It wasn't just Ezra. It was me. The version of me from before I rewrote everything. And you are the only one left to remember why. The recording flickered. Then Ezra's voice broke through. Sienna, I don't know if I survived. My heart clenched. But I think part of me is still here. Somewhere. In the system. I stepped closer. If you find this, don't stop looking. The message ended. Silence. The final decision. I stared at the dark screen. I had a choice. I could walk away. Accept this new reality. Live in it, unknown, forgotten. Or I could search for him. As we cling to the last remnants of a lost world, we reflect on what once was. I took a slow breath. Then, I made my decision. I turned away from the screen, and I walked toward the unknown. The last words of the recording whispered in my mind. You were never supposed to be here. For the first time I smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, that meant I could be anywhere. Epilogue. The search. A city that feels new again. The world was different now. But for the first time, it didn't scare me. I walked through the streets, watching people move freely, unburdened by fate, marks, or the weight of a system deciding their future. They didn't know they had been something else before. They had been rewritten. That may be acceptable. I wasn't here to fix the past but to discover what remained. Following the glitches. The first time I noticed it, I thought I imagined it. A streetlight that flickered too long, casting shadows where there should have been none. The second time, I was listening to a radio in a cafe. A voice crackled through the static, speaking in a tone I recognized. I leaned forward, my breath catching, but then it was gone. I found a name buried deep in a public directory the third time. A name that shouldn't exist. Ezra Calder. It was corrupted, fragmented, and barely legible. But it was there. And that meant he was too. Ezra's echo. I followed the signs to an old terminal hidden beneath an abandoned subway station. A thick layer of dust blanketed the screen, shrouding it in neglect. The power flickered hesitantly as if yearning for the touch of someone to stir it from its slumber. I hesitated, then activated the console. The screen blinked. A single message appeared. Not from the system. Not from the past. The words were glitched, barely holding together. But I could still read them. Sienna, I'm still here. Into the unknown. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. He was still here. Somewhere. I wasn't alone. I turned from the terminal, stepping back onto the city streets. And this time, I wasn't running from something. I was running toward it. As I disappeared into the crowd, the last echoes of the past whispered in my mind. You were never supposed to be here. Maybe not. But I was here anyway. And I wasn't finished yet.